When I first started this job, I thought it was going to be the break I needed. I'd been hopping between contracts, grinding through part-time shifts, and suddenly this position landed in my lap. Steady hours, actual benefits, and a team that, at least on paper, seemed normal. But on my very first day, I noticed something. You ever walk into a room and just feel the atmosphere change? Like you're not even in the door yet, and people already have their minds made up about you? That's exactly what happened to me. There was one person, let's call her Rachel, who gave me a look I'll never forget. Not just the polite half-smile co-workers give a newcomer number. This was different. Her eyes narrowed, lips tight, like I'd walked straight into her territory. I hadn't even sat down at my desk, and it already felt like I was in trouble. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she was having a bad day, maybe I reminded her of someone. But as the hours rolled on, little things started stacking up. She would forget to include me on emails, then point out in meetings that I wasn't across the details. She corrected me on things that weren't even wrong. And whenever the manager walked by, she turned sugary sweet, like the perfect employee. I kept telling myself not to be paranoid. I was new. Don't stir the pot, just learn the ropes. But then something happened that made me realize this wasn't about me being the new hire. On my second week, I was given a project. Nothing huge, just a client file that needed updating. I worked on it all morning, double-checked every detail, saved the changes. Then, right before the hand-in deadline, I opened the folder and the file was gone, not misplaced, not accidentally moved, completely deleted. My stomach dropped. I searched everywhere, but there was no trace. I went to IT and they confirmed it. Someone had gone into the shared drive and permanently removed it. And here's the kicker. Only 3 people had access to that folder. Me, the manager, and Rachel. I tried to play it cool, said maybe it was a glitch. But when I glanced over at her desk, she was smirking. Not even subtle. Just leaning back in her chair, arms folded, watching me panic. That was the moment I realized this wasn't random. Someone wanted me gone. Still, I didn't have proof. And if I went to my boss without it, I'd look like a paranoid rookie pointing fingers. So I decided to keep my head down and rebuild the file from scratch. Pulled an all-nighter, turned it in just under the wire. The next morning, my manager called me into her office. She said, I've been hearing some concerns. A few people think you're not fitting in, that you've been careless with your work. Careless? That word hit me like a punch. I'd barely been there 2 weeks, and already there were concerns. I asked, who said that? But of course she wouldn't name names, just said I needed to prove myself and be more collaborative. Walking out of that office, I didn't need to be told who had planted those seeds. Rachel wasn't just giving me dirty looks anymore. She was actively shaping how the entire team saw me, and I knew if I didn't figure out why she was doing it and how to stop her, this dream job was going to turn into my worst nightmare. After that meeting with my manager, I started looking at everything differently. It wasn't just the missing file or the dirty looks. It was the way conversations went quiet when I walked into the break room. The way people avoided eye contact in meetings, like they didn't want to get dragged into whatever Rachel was stirring up. The office itself wasn't a huge place, maybe 25 people total. Small enough that gossip traveled fast, but big enough that if someone wanted to quietly ruin your reputation, they could do it without ever being obvious. And Rachel knew how to play that game. She had seniority, for one. She'd been with the company for almost 6 years, and everyone saw her as reliable, the person who knew all the systems, all the back doors, all the history. People went to her with questions before they go to a manager. It gave her this weird, unspoken authority. I was just the opposite, the new face, the outsider. Easy to paint as incompetent if that's the story people wanted to believe. At first it was small things. A document would go missing from my desk. I'd get an email about a deadline that turned out not to exist. I'd spend hours chasing down a task, only to be told I'd misunderstood the brief. And every time Rachel was nearby, watching, then came the stolen credit. One afternoon, I stayed late, working on a data report that the team had been struggling with. I cracked the formula, got everything balanced, sent it off to the manager. The next day, in the team meeting, Rachel presented it as her own, word for word, chart for chart, even the same formatting. She said she'd pulled it together overnight. Everyone clapped, manager smiled, and I sat there, stunned, Realizing she had full access to my drafts folder, I wanted to speak up. My chest was burning with it, but in that moment I froze. I thought, if I call her out and can't prove it, I'll look petty. So I kept quiet, and Rachel beamed, soaking up the praise like she just invented the wheel. After that, it snowballed. She started dropping little comments to the manager about me being overwhelmed. She told another coworker that I was struggling to keep up, and I could feel the shift. People stopped asking for my input. They started double-checking my work like I was some unreliable intern. The worst part was how calculated it all felt. Rachel wasn't sloppy. She didn't outright insult me where others could hear. She did it in whispers, in half-truths, in ways that made me second-guess my own memory. But then something slipped. One Friday afternoon, I overheard Rachel in the break room. She was talking to one of the newer hires, saying, it's just a matter of time. Management will see they don't belong here. She didn't say my name, but she didn't have to. The look on the new hire's face told me exactly who they were talking about. That was when I realized this wasn't random hostility. This was a campaign, a plan to push me out. And judging by the way she spoke, she'd done it before. It made me wonder how many other people had come and gone from this office because of her. How many promising hires had been run out before they had a chance to prove themselves. By the time I packed up my desk that day, I'd made up my mind. If I didn't push back, if I didn't find a way to turn this around, I was next on the chopping block. What I didn't know was that Rachel was already planning her next move, one that could cost me not just my job, but my reputation entirely. After that overheard conversation, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just pettiness. Rachel was deliberately building a case against me brick by brick, and if I didn't act, it would only be a matter of time before management believed her version of reality. I needed a plan. The first step was to stop reacting. That was exactly what she wanted, for me to get flustered, to look defensive, to lash out in ways she could use against me. So instead of letting her see me rattled, I decided to play it cool, smile in meetings, nod along when she spoke, pretend like nothing was wrong. All the while, I'd be paying attention. The second step was documentation. Every task I completed, I kept copies saved to a personal drive with timestamps. Every email I sent, I blind copied myself to a private account. And every conversation that seemed suspicious, I wrote down in a log the moment it ended. It felt a little paranoid, sure, but after that deleted file incident, I wasn't taking chances. And then I started watching patterns Rachel had tells. She always struck when the manager wasn't around, or when she had an audience who would spread her version of events. She liked to undermine me in subtle ways. An accidental interruption here, a whispered correction there, but she rarely left a trace. If I was going to stop her, I needed to catch her in a moment she couldn't deny. One opportunity came sooner than I expected. We had a big client presentation coming up, and I was asked to put together the initial draft. I knew exactly what would happen. I'd stay up late, do the work, and the next day she'd swoop in and present it as her own. But this time I was ready. I created two versions, one accurate, polished, and ready to present, the other a decoy riddled with tiny errors that only someone skimming would miss. I saved the decoy in my visible drafts folder, the polished one in a secure location, and then I waited. Sure enough, the next morning, Rachel sent an email to the manager attaching her draft of the presentation. Word for word, it was my decoy. Watching her stand in front of the room, confidently presenting numbers that didn't add up, was both nerve-wracking and exhilarating. I kept glancing at the manager, waiting for the confusion to kick in, and it did. Halfway through, the client raised a hand and said, "Wait, these figures don't match the report we received last month." Rachel stumbled. She tried to cover, flipping through the slides, but the errors were too obvious. The meeting ended awkwardly, and afterward, the manager pulled her aside. For a moment, I thought I'd won, but Rachel was quick. She spun the story before anyone could question her too deeply, claiming she'd been given bad data from someone else. And I didn't need her to say my name to know exactly who she was blaming. That was the danger. Even when she slipped, she knew how to redirect suspicion. One decoy wasn't enough. I needed something undeniable, so I adjusted my plan. The goal wasn't just to survive, it was to expose her, to gather enough proof that when the moment came, she couldn't wriggle out of it with sweet talk and half-truths. And while I was preparing, she was already making her boldest move yet, something that would put my entire job on the line. The weeks that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Every day I showed up smiling, polite, cooperative, while underneath I was documenting everything. I was building a wall of evidence one brick at a time, but Rachel wasn't slowing down either. She'd sensed that her little games hadn't been enough to push me out, so she escalated. It started with a write-up. Out of nowhere, my manager called me into her office and slid a form across the desk. A formal warning. According to Rachel, I'd missed multiple deadlines, made sloppy mistakes, and even ignored instructions. Reading the report, I barely recognized it as my own work. Dates were twisted, quotes taken out of context, and worst of all, she had a witness, another coworker she'd clearly convinced to back her up. For a moment, I felt the floor drop out from under me. A write-up this early in my time at the company could have been the beginning of the end. But instead of panicking, I reached into my folder and laid out copies of emails with timestamps, proving I'd completed those tasks on time. I could see my manager's expression change as she flipped through them. Confused. Caught between two conflicting stories. She didn't rescind the warning right away, but she told me she'd review the matter further. That alone felt like a small victory. It also confirmed something important. My system was working. Documentation was my lifeline. And if I kept at it, sooner or later Rachel would trap herself. So I doubled down. I began keeping detailed notes of every meeting. I quietly asked IT for access logs whenever a file mysteriously disappeared, framing it like I was just trying to learn the system better. I even set up a subtle naming convention in my documents, so if one went missing or got altered, I'd know exactly who had touched it and when. Meanwhile, Rachel grew bolder. She stopped pretending to be friendly. Instead, she played the victim card, whispering to others that I was out to get her, claiming I was the one sabotaging her work. She acted paranoid in front of the manager, sighing heavily whenever I walked past, muttering about being undermined. At first, I worried people might believe her. But then something shifted. A couple of co-workers started quietly checking in with me, asking if I was okay, offering small bits of help. It was like they'd seen this pattern before and didn't fully buy into her performance. The real turning point came one evening when I stayed late to finish up a project. I was alone in the office when I heard the door unlock. Rachel walked in, clearly not expecting anyone else to be there. She went straight to her desk, logged in, and within minutes she was inside one of my folders. I watched from across the room as she copied files into her own drive, editing the metadata as if they were her creations. She hadn't seen me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. For a split second, I considered confronting her right then and there, but instead, I took out my phone, quietly recorded her screen from a distance, making sure to catch the timestamps and her username in the corner. It wasn't the clearest evidence, but it was something. The next day, she unveiled the project she'd been working on. My project, word for word. She walked into that meeting with the same smug confidence as always, laying out the work as if it had come from her late-night grind. And as the manager leaned forward, nodding, Rachel shot me a look. Not of triumph, but of warning. Like she was daring me to say something, knowing she had the upper hand. For the first time, I realized how far she was willing to go. This wasn't just office politics anymore. She was trying to erase me completely, to rewrite my work as hers until the manager saw me as useless. But she didn't know about the recording, and she didn't know I was finally ready to use it. The day it all came to a head started like any other. I walked into the office, tried to keep my head down, and went about my work. But by mid-morning, I was called into the manager's office again. This time, the HR representative was sitting there too. My stomach sank. I knew what this meant. The manager cleared her throat and said they had serious concerns about my performance and integrity. Apparently, Rachel had brought forward new evidence that I'd been stealing work, missing deadlines, and even tampering with files. She'd gone all in, piling accusation on top of accusation, painting me as a liability to the company. HR slid a packet across the desk. A termination recommendation, one more infraction, and I'd be gone. I could feel my pulse in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew this was her end game. She'd built up the narrative, stacked the cards, and now she was ready to tip them over. So I asked one question. Can I see the evidence? They hesitated, then handed me a folder. Inside were printouts of documents Rachel claimed to have authored, documents I recognized immediately. They were mine. Same formatting quirks, same phrasing, even the same typos I'd corrected in later drafts. I let them talk, nodding, acting like I was listening. And then I pulled out my phone. I opened the video from that late night in the office, placed it on the table, and hit play. The room went silent. On the screen, clear as day, was Rachel at her desk, her username visible in the corner, her hands moving across the keyboard, opening my folder, copying my files. The timestamp matched perfectly with the metadata on the documents she was claiming as her own. HR leaned forward, squinting. My manager's eyes widened, and for the first time since I'd met her, Rachel looked pale. She tried to blurt out an excuse, saying it was taken out of context, that she was just backing up files, but the evidence spoke louder than she ever could. The manager asked me to step out for a few minutes while they reviewed the situation. I walked into the hallway, my legs shaking, adrenaline still buzzing through me. Coworkers glanced up as I passed, probably wondering why HR was involved, and I just kept moving, gripping my phone like it was a lifeline. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened. They asked me back in. Rachel was gone. HR explained that the company had a strict policy against file tampering and misrepresentation. Rachel had been suspended pending investigation, but given the video and the matching metadata, it wasn't looking good for her. I should have felt relief, and in a way I did. The knot in my chest loosened, the weeks of second-guessing and paranoia finally justified, but there was also a heaviness to it. The realization that I'd nearly lost everything because one person decided I didn't deserve to be there. As I left the office that day, I couldn't help but think, if I hadn't kept those records, if I hadn't caught that one moment on video, I would have been the one walked out with a box of my belongings. Rachel thought she had me cornered. She thought the story was hers to tell. But she underestimated me, and now the tables had turned. What came next wasn't just about surviving. It was about deciding what kind of person I was going to be in the aftermath. The following week was strangely quiet. Rachel's desk sat empty, her chair pushed in, the usual hum of her constant commentary replaced with silence. People avoided talking about it directly, but you could feel the tension loosen in the air. Conversations in the break room didn't cut off when I walked in. The awkward glances were gone. It was like the office was finally breathing again. A few days later, HR called me back in. They explained that Rachel's employment had been terminated. The investigation had uncovered not just what she'd done to me, but a history of similar behavior, deleted files, manipulated reports, whisper campaigns against other employees who'd quietly resigned before anyone connected the dots. I wasn't her first target. I was just the first one to stand my ground. Hearing that brought a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. Satisfaction, because I'd proven myself and protected my job. Unease, because I realized how many people had likely been chewed up by her before me. All those names on the old staff lists that made sense now. My manager apologized for not seeing it sooner. HR assured me my record was clean, that the write-up would be removed. They even thanked me for handling things professionally, but it didn't feel like a clean victory. It felt heavier than that. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing small changes. A coworker who'd once kept their distance now asked if I wanted to grab lunch. Another offered to collaborate on a project. Slowly, the wall between me and the rest of the team crumbled. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't perfect. But the shadow of suspicion Rachel had cast was fading. For me, The biggest shift was internal. I realized how close I'd come to walking away, how easy it would have been to throw up my hands and say it wasn't worth it. But if I'd done that, Rachel would have won, and she'd have moved on to the next person, and the cycle would have continued. Instead, I learned the power of patience, of documentation, of staying calm when someone else is trying to push you off balance. It wasn't about playing dirty. It was about protecting myself with the truth, even when it took weeks to come to light. I won't pretend it didn't leave a mark. Every new workplace I enter now, I pay closer attention. I don't ignore the little signs anymore. The subtle digs, the manipulations hiding behind a smile. I've learned that sometimes the biggest battles in an office aren't about deadlines or clients. They're about power, about control, about someone needing to push another person down just to feel taller. But I've also learned something else. Those people don't win forever. Not if you stand your ground. Not if you quietly build your case and wait for the right moment. Rachel thought she was writing my story. Instead, she wrote her own downfall. And for the first time since I'd started, I finally felt like I belonged at that job. Not because I'd been accepted, but because I'd earned my place by refusing to let someone take it away,